I did make a good judgment to optimize for video because we've got a little video coming up. Let's see what we can do with slideshow. Can you see that slide, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, well, it should be up, the logo slide, so to speak. And I don't know, am I appearing anywhere on your screens? I'm always curious about what it is on the back.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, just this afternoon, I was trying to figure out how to get the slides on 3/4 of one side and being able to see people face to face on a strip somewhere,
Right.
like 1/4 or something.
Yeah, I'm only seeing my own slides here, but what we'll do is we'll go over, the slideshow won't take but about, my prepared stuff won't take but about, 8 to 10 minutes probably. And then at that point, we'll stop sharing and we'll just have a great discussion. So let's, without further ado, and I think Mercedes is gonna do the letting people, good, I can see there's David Fishman. We'll let him in for sure. Well, so here's who I am. I'm Brian Baird, and was a former member of Congress. I served for 12 years from representing Southwest Washington in the Congress. Prior to that, I had a doctorate in clinical psychology, spent 20 plus years doing clinical practice, and I had a specialization in neuropsychology, but I worked in almost every other kind of setting you can work in, from psychiatric hospitals to group homes to incarceration units for juvenile offenders and quite a few other places. I was also a university professor, chaired a department of psychology at Pacific Lutheran University, and for a time was a university president in the Antioch University system. I have now most recently founded and co-chair as a volunteer basis entirely what we call the National Museum and Center for Service. And that's the purpose of our focus today. If I can get my screen to advance, which I can't. That's troublesome. Hang on a second. I pre-tested all of this. I'm totally frozen. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Do you just want to try closing it and going and coming back?
There we go. There we go. Sorry, it wasn't responding to my arrows. I'm not sure why. But anyway, we got it solved. So I wanted to take an imaginary walk through our nation's capital. And these are some of the sights you can see as you walk through the Capitol. And you'll see pretty quickly that we have a lot, as many of you know, a lot of memorials to soldiers and to war. And that's fitting. But I want to share with you an alternative vision, not an alternative, but an addition. And we've got about a 3.5 minute video that summarizes quite well. Welcome, Julie. Oh, hang on a sec. Oh, somebody else is letting people in. We're going to start with about a 3.5 minute video that illustrates the concept behind the National Museum and Center for Service. And after that, then we'll go into some more detail. Well, so I want to thank the architectural firm Olson and Kundig, who donated the imagery for that, renderings of the museum completely pro bono, and gave us a lot of help with that. Khalil Gibran, as some of you know, wrote a poem and a title of one of his books, and the title was "Work is Love Made Visible." Well, if that's so, then the work of peace and service should not be invisible, and yet too often it really is. We've got hundreds of millions of stories to tell. In fact, there are more than 1 million AmeriCorps volunteer alums. There are 1.3 million Rotarians worldwide, 1.4 million Lions members worldwide. There are more than 600,000 Red Cross volunteers, and that's just a few of the countless, actually not countless, more than 1 million organizations in our country that are in the nonprofit status. And every day around the world, Americans are doing amazing things, but there's no place in the country. And in fact, there's no museum of service that we know of at the national level anywhere on the planet, and there should be. One moment. I'm having a very sticky not sure what is happening to my computer, and I'm very sorry about that. It's kind of embarrassing because I had this working out. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sorry for that. I'm having to use a different system, but I've got to figure it out. I'll be able to do it now from now on. So, one way you can tell there's nothing like I've just described is if you do a search on Google, memorials to civilian service in the US, pretty reasonable thing to look for. Everything that comes up, everything on the first page is memorials to war. So try a different search name. Try museums to non-military service. Everything that comes up is a museum to war or to soldiers, which again is fine, but we have so in our culture defined now service as associated with military service. And when we say thank you for your service, it's almost exclusively to the military, and all the other forms of service get ignored. What are some of those examples? I mentioned already some. Rotary International, now 1.2, 1.3, I think the latest numbers are, million members around the world, 35,000 clubs. And what has Rotary done? Help stamp out polio. It's almost there, and they're working vigorously on malaria and other things. And in every local community around America where there's a Rotary or a Lions Club or Kiwanis, many, many volunteers are stepping forward, regardless of their differences in other ways, to serve. Again, we don't tell that story. Peace Corps, launched by the great phrase of John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And it transformed Americans' lives of all backgrounds and the people they served. Over 240,000 Americans have now served in more than 141 countries, and the National Museum and Center for Service is honored to have the endorsement of the National Peace Corps Association and its director. AmeriCorps, 270,000 AmeriCorps volunteers serving annually. 40,000 communities have been helped, and there are more than 1 million AmeriCorps alums. We were speaking to the wonderful new CEO of AmeriCorps, Michael Smith, who himself has benefited from service as a young man and is now giving back in many ways. And one of our board members and our volunteers is Bill Basil, who is the former CEO of AmeriCorps. And now, importantly, which many Americans don't realize, seniors can volunteer to become AmeriCorps members. And if they earn their educational stipend, they can actually pass that on to their kids or their grandkids. And with tens of thousands of Americans retiring and record numbers now, there are a lot of those people with a lot of talents, and we need to find ways to connect them and enlist them in continued service. United Way, more than 125 years of service, 2.8 million volunteers and 9.8 million donors, and 1,100 local United Ways across the United States. And by the way, this has been replicated now, as so much of American service has around the world. The simple truth is, the United States of America, and it may sound boastful, but I think it's accurate, is really a leader in the world in service, and their generosity when we're at our best is unparalleled. Here's some stats that people might find interesting. More than 77 million Americans reported that they volunteered last year. Total donations to charity, this is actually 2 years ago, I think. Total contributions, more than 450 billion in donations. 1.8 million not-for-profits. 7% of the total workforce in the country is engaged in nonprofits. More than 1 out of 3 veterans continue to serve. These are folks who've been in military uniform, they've retired from the military, and they continue to serve. One of our own members, Jason Hatch, served 2 tours in Iraq, then went to work for State Department. He finished his tour in Africa and State Department, came home, joined AmeriCorps, and now Jason is helping assist Afghan refugees and saving lives, even literally as we speak today. And not everyone has participated as somebody engaged in service, but I'm certain that 100% of Americans have benefited in some way from the service of others. And importantly, service is, we will argue, is fundamental to who we are as Americans. Indeed, it's not just serving to help others and that we benefit from the service process ourselves, but we don't talk about it very much. But it turns out, I believe, that it is the secret ingredient, not a secret, but it's the essential ingredient in any democratic republic. Why? Because if you don't run for office motivated by serving others, and instead you run motivated by serving yourself, then democracy is just a thin veneer by which malintended people gain power and then wield that power for themselves or their cronies. And through history, there have been some horrific people elected through democratic process, but in each one of those cases, their idea of service was either non-existent or it was distorted to mean self-service for our own group at the expense of others. So without the core motivation and character of service, democracy doesn't work. And we need to incorporate that when we do our various civics education programs, and it will be one of the messages of the National Museum and Center for Service. So what will the NMCFS be? And you can help in a moment. We're going to hear your thoughts on this, so you can help shape it. But here are some ideas of what we think it should be. First, and very importantly, it should be a place to unite Americans. The American people, as the video said, are really, really not happy about the divisions. And we need something that can respect our differences, but transcend our divisions. We ought to show America at its very best to the world. When foreign visitors come to the capital of our country, Washington, D.C., and they walk down the mall, they see art, they see dinosaurs, they see our historic documents and some of our technological wonders in the Air and Space Museum, and they see plenty of monuments to our military fallen. But they do not see the other kinds of service anywhere in the National Mall, or for that matter, honored in any of the capital cities of any of our states. We want this to not be sort of your grandfather's museum with inanimate objects, mostly from dead people, hanging on the walls. We want it to be a vibrant, experiential, interactive place that highlights service in real time as it's happening across our country and across the world. It should also be a memorial because behind the scenes, we don't know it, it's below the media radar usually. People die giving service almost every day around the world. Americans do. Maybe they contract an infectious disease. Maybe they're injured in a car accident. Maybe they're the victims of landmines. But Americans are all around the world every day risking their lives and sometimes giving their lives, but we have no place to honor it. As one powerful example, last year, by April of last year, we had already lost 3,600 frontline healthcare workers in our country alone. 3,500 Americans had left their families, gone to work to save others, contracted an illness, and died because of it. Yet there's no place in America to say thank you, to tell their stories, to let loved ones come and honor the people they've lost. We should have such a place, and we don't. We want this to also be a model for local, state, and international museums, as I've mentioned, because this shouldn't be just one signature place in the nation's capital. It should be a model for the entire country and indeed for the world. Not every school child is going to come to DC, but they can probably make it to their state capital. And you know what? If they can't make it to their state capital, let's have small templates for how local communities in their public libraries, in their schools, in their public square can have museums to local service. So whether it's Fruita, Colorado, where I grew up, a little bitty town in Western Colorado, or New York City, or Washington, DC, or somewhere else, let's have local museums and centers for service. What else will, remember, this is not just the museum of service, it's the center for service. So what will the center do? Well, it can promote and support service in different forms. It can be a convening organization to bring other service entities together, to collaborate, to share best practices, to have annual meetings in our space. We can have online exhibits and events, and we can host a virtual museum. My late teen young boys would probably rather visit a virtual museum in the metaverse, and that's just fine. We can get them there from the comfort of their gaming chairs if we can tear them away from their video games, and they can see how even that skill can lead to service. A very dear friend of mine has a son who has been using his computer skills to teach people on the Navajo reservation computer coding. And as a result of that, they've generated some remarkably interesting and clever games to learn the Dene language, so that the Navajo children are combining their own cultural background and interests with modern technology and coding. And a friend of mine's son is able to provide that service from here in Washington, D.C., even though he's reaching across the country to the Navajo reservation. We also want this to be a place to connect people with service organizations. When you visit a museum of service, be it the one in DC or in a local community, it must have on-ramps to help people sign up and join and participate in service themselves. Where will it be? It needs to be near the National Mall. That is where we honor greatness in our country. It is where people deserve to be respected and honored, and that's where tourists and visitors from our own country and around the world will visit. So somewhere very near the National Mall, probably not on the mall per se, because frankly, that is a very difficult thing to surmount, the laws and regulations about that. But there are many federal office buildings near the mall that would make fine locations for a National Museum of Service, welcoming to all Americans. And by the way, if we set this up in the right building, we could use some of that office space as office space for the service organizations themselves. So on the first couple floors, there might be a service museum. And then in the upper floors, there'd be a center for service, including offices for many of the government and possibly non-governmental service organizations as well. What will it achieve? Why do this? We hope it'll transform, as the video said, transform how we think of service. We hope it will inspire people to serve, and that it will multiply the existing service organizations that are already so prominent and so wonderful in our country. It'll also bring us around shared values that I mentioned that honor our differences, but transcend our divisions. When there's a crisis, American people don't say, well, there's a crisis. Let's only have some people from some religions respond to the crisis, and they can only help other people of their same religion. We cross our religious grounds. We cross our partisan political grounds. We cross our geographic boundaries, our economic boundaries, our skin color boundaries. We combine the very best that we have to offer and set aside our differences for the greater good. And we need that spirit in America today, right now. We also want people to be inspired from the very earliest age to the last moment of our lives to give to them from ourselves to others. And we want to expand existing organizations, but also help people build new organizations as new needs arise. And finally, we hope this will be a signature place that reminds ourselves and the world of what America can be and do when we're at our very, very best. Who supports the museum already? Well, we're led by an all-volunteer team. I'm completely volunteer, as almost all of our advisory group, experienced professionals with backgrounds in nonprofit and museums. We've got architects, government officials, faith-based members of the military, etc. The endorsements have included Peace Corps directors, members of the U.S. Peace Corps Association, former AmeriCorps directors, FEMA directors, Rotary, the Partnership for Public Service, the Jefferson Awards, and a number of leaders of very prominent organizations. And this is only a partial list. So now I'm going to stop screen sharing and the fun part can begin. We could hear if you have any questions or your ideas. The question here will be this: if you were designing the museum or you're thinking of taking friends or yourself to visit it, what would you like it to be? If you said, imagine a place where, and then you get to fill in the blank. I'm going to stop sharing now and welcome back. I'm happy now at this point to hear any thoughts or suggestion you have. And we've been joined by Julie Budkowski, who's on our team. She's our program manager. And perhaps, Julie, if you can also help take notes. And Julie's been a force of nature helping us work with this. And again, Mercedes, I want to thank you for all your work putting this together. And now that everyone's on the screen, I want to especially thank the Carter School for this wonderful week of marvelous presentations of all sorts on lots of different topics. And of course, the 50th, is it the 50th anniversary of the Carter School, Mercedes?
Yes, it is. Yes, this year is our 50th anniversary.
Congratulations. That's a great legacy. Another example of service. So with that, the floor is open. Anybody's welcome to ask any questions you might, or any suggestions, any ideas. What would you like this to be? You can either raise your hand or just shout.
Yeah, I love the idea. I'm just going to jump in. Absolutely love the idea. I want to know how people can get involved in helping to make it come to fruition. And can you speak about where it is in the process? How close are we to making it be a place, a system, a service? I just, tell us more.
Great. Well, thanks, Linda. First of all, I love the we, because we'd love to have you participate.
Yeah.
Our website is really easy. It's nmcfs.org, nmcfs.org. And if you want, you can write hello, which is our sort of our information line, hello@nmcfs.org. I should have left that slide up. But we'll get back to you. And hello@nmcfs.org, and we'll get back to you. Here's where we're at. We're working on 3 fronts, and we've made exciting progress in all. One is to reach out to the stakeholders. We want to make sure that the service individuals and organizations, that we respect their interests and how they want to have their story told. And frankly, we want to earn their support, because not financial support initially, we want to earn their sort of moral support, that they can see, you know what, we want our stories to be told. We want people to know of the service and the sacrifice and the benefits of what people work with us. So that's one avenue. A second is legislative. If we're going to build near the mall, or build is probably not the right word, but adapt a building near the mall, we'll need congressional authorization and support. So I just today have had 5 different meetings with members of the US Senate, both sides of the aisle. There's a thing in the Congress called the Service Caucus, which is a bipartisan, bicameral House and Senate group dedicated to promoting service. And so we're reaching out to all of those folks, and reaching out to staff, frankly, because they deserve the recognition as well. Then the other side is fundraising. This is not going to be cheap, but it will be money well spent, because if we can expand the numbers of people who are engaged in service and who contribute to service, we'll make a lot of progress. We've got a very exciting development as far as where we are, and I'll give you sort of a timeline in a second. The Martin Luther King Jr. Library in downtown Washington, D.C. I forgot to ask where everyone's from, but they've just completed a $200 million renovation. It's a spectacular building, and we've reached an agreement with them. They've invited us to have one of our first exhibition will be in their space. So you've got a signature building, a beautiful building right in downtown D.C., named after Dr. Martin Luther King, who, of course, was a great believer in public service and lived his life and gave his life in public service. And we've got a beautiful space. So we're raising money for that, and it'll be a chance for us to learn, how do we do this right? And again, it's fun because we're not gathering artifacts. There'll be some, but we're really trying to tell people's stories and have people interact on a problem-solving basis so that they really engage and experience service. So the other thing we're doing then is, if you look at sort of a legislative strategy, typically you start with a commission that studies things. The commission reports back, and then the report is used to guide selection of an architectural and design firm. There's a competition for that typically, et cetera. We have a very, very ambitious time frame, which is by 2026, which is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So by 2026, we would like to at least be breaking ground. And in the interim, we will do a bunch, if we can, of these prototype exhibitions on larger scales like the library, and then even pop-ups in little locations as well. So we're moving on all 3 fronts simultaneously, and we can certainly use the help because we're all volunteers. And I spend way more than full time on this, and it's gratifying to do so. Does that answer your question, Linda?
Yes, thank you. And best if we have suggestions or thoughts, reach out via the website.
Absolutely right. Yeah, the website's got lots more information, all the lists of endorsements. You can see the members of our advisory board, And yeah, please. And then the video, the variation of the video is on that website. So yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Linda, for the question. Julianne?
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. It was very inspiring. My late husband was the architect for the Martin Luther King Jr. Library. So
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean the local architect. He wasn't he was the local.
What a
So
beautiful
that
building.
is an amazing example of historic preservation. And I'm wondering why or if you all are considering using any of the many wonderful vacant buildings in Washington, D.C. that are really, there's so many signature buildings, sort of adaptive reuse, if that is a possibility.
We sure are, Julianne. We hope, we're pretty committed to the idea of using an existing structure. As you know, in addition to our effort, already approved, authorized by Congress, is the National Women's History Museum and the Museum of the Latino. And so those are taking up a lot of bandwidth and oxygen from what the Smithsonian resources have. We don't necessarily want to proceed that way. We would love one day to be part of the Smithsonian, but they've got their hands full, and we don't want to just wait, because it could easily be a 10 to 15 year wait. We believe there's a whole generation of people at all ages now serving. So let's find a different model. And one model would be the Holocaust Museum in the following sense. It is not part of the Smithsonian. It was created separately, and it works and coordinates with the Smithsonian, but it is its own independent entity. But it grew out of a commission initially initiated by President Carter and then by the Congress. And so we want to try to follow that model with private philanthropic funding, possibly some federal funding, but by all means, we're looking at existing buildings. And frankly, that is precious space along the mall, very precious space. And if it's being used just for office buildings, right now, there's a lot of office space in the city of DC. And so if we needed to move people from one office space near the mall to another office space not that far from the mall, but we then could use something accessible to the American people when they visit the mall, that's a good investment. And so we'll look at those possibilities. We'll hopefully work with GSA, the Government Service Administration, to find suitable buildings. And of course, we'll need some acts of Congress to deal with that. But that would be good use of proximal space. And you can do it in 1/10 of the cost, 1/10 of the time, and a lot less, probably 100th of the bureaucracy, I would guess. So great suggestion, Julianne. And thank you. I'm sorry to hear of your husband's passing, but my goodness, what a legacy. What a wonderful legacy. Alex?
Hi, thank
Hey.
you. This is a great presentation. I've been in museums for a few years, and I've always kind of wondered why a place like this didn't exist. And I'm in a master's now trying to understand how museums can build local peace in the US. So thank you to you and the team that's working on this. I'm just a little bit curious about kind of the programming you have in mind at this stage. And kind of, so if I'm a visitor and I come into this museum years from now, and I want to get connected to a service organization or learn skills to serve my community, what's kind of the model that you have in mind for that?
Great. Well, there's two elements of it. There's the museum model. What will you experience in the museum and what will you learn? And among things, for example, we want to customize it. So we want people, whatever their background. And thankfully, when we first started this, Alex, people would always ask me, well, how do we decide who's worthy of being in this museum? And we said, no, that's not the concept. It's not about the few great people. Frankly, so many American museums are dedicated to the great man. Forgive the sexism, but that's inherent in most American museums. We believe it's the greatness in every person, and that every person has something they can do to contribute. So we want it to be very broad in that sense and to tell the real life stories. A couple of examples. One is, instead of coming in and having someone say, ladies and gentlemen, in auditorium A, we're going to show you the same video we've shown for the last 10 years. Now we can say, in auditorium A, we're going to be linking up live via satellite with doctors and nurses helping refugees in Poland coming out of the Ukraine war, or in situ in Kyiv or something. So you can have real live, real people, real in the moment reporting. And you can also meet with docents, et cetera, who have been in America or been in Peace Corps. And young people can learn those pathways, which was part of your other question. We want on-ramps. So if you come there, you'll not only learn, you'll say, these are ours, this is what my interests are. Maybe it's my friend's son who's interested in computer gaming. Maybe it's that you're interested in mechanics or something. Maybe you're a farm kid from Kansas. We want to help connect you with your interests to something that will be meaningful for you so that you can pursue your interests and contribute with those skills. And then we'll partner with other organizations, with academic institutions, with libraries, with the service organizations themselves, and you can get connected in that way. So that's part of our mission. If we succeed, everybody who visits this museum is going to ask themselves, you know, maybe I can do a little more. And that's a pretty good thing. And we also believe, I should say, Alex, we see this as really, you know, when we say transformative, we don't just mean transforming how we think of service or transforming how we think of museums. Imagine this example. When we go to a baseball game, for example, we always hear the following. Ladies and gentlemen, the Washington Nationals would like you to join in honoring the men and women in uniform, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. Please stand and be recognized. And we all applaud, as we should. But wouldn't it be beautiful if that announcer would say, and now we'd like you to join us in honoring the teachers and the nurses and the doctors and the daycare workers and the volunteers in the food banks and any other American who serves their community and their nation or the world. Please stand and be recognized. And now we applaud them. So we want to infuse this ethos and value at a much higher level. Alexis, your hand's up.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. When you started, I didn't realize that the center wasn't actually like built yet, which was interesting, but also really surprising. My question does actually have to do with how people are chosen for to be recognized within the museum. I was thinking of whether it would be the volunteers themselves seeking out stories of people who have served, or if regular visitors could actually nominate people that they think have inspiring stories. Or if, like you said, that you wanted it not to be the same thing that you've shown for the past 10 years. So would these exhibitions be more seasonal? So you have like, not necessarily like a theme or like, yeah, just like, how would you decide who gets their stories told and when?
Great questions on every front. The answer is yes to all of those. And I think you're right. That's part of what's so exciting about this. You know, it's a good problem to have because we've got so many stories. First of all, we'll have an advisory board made up of the people on the service organizations themselves, and they'll talk about what things they want to do. We'll have some principles, like it needs to be representative. We want to talk not just about the great, you know, the big leaders, but the average folks, the woman in the inner city who sees that kids are hungry and finds ways to give them sack lunches, the farm kid or the farmer who's heading across the world to help people deal with dry land agriculture, the computer geek, the mechanic, etc. We want that story to be that universal, but then there will be some bigger themes and there will be some immediate reactions. For example, in COVID, would have been a logical thing if you have a National Museum of Service right then and there to tell the story of that service. The museum can also partner, for example, with other museums, and the center can. Let me give you one example. All across America today, science museums are reopening, right? They've been closed like most other museums. They're reopening. The wonderful opportunity there is they are reopening because of science. It is science that has let those museums reopen. So wouldn't it be neat if every science museum in the country had an opening exhibition of science as service? And you inspired children to understand, young people or any age to say, if you dedicate yourself to science, you can help save millions and millions of lives. That's a pretty inspiring message, and the center could partner with that. Now, I love your idea of, can you nominate somebody? One of our people had a super suggestion that I just love. Imagine, Alexis, let me ask you a question. If you had the chance to nominate someone for this museum, and you can nominate more than one, but let's just pick one, who would you nominate? Just tell us their story real quickly.
That's a hard one, because I know a lot of people who do volunteer and stuff, but probably one of my professors, I'm in the conflict school, the Carter School. So I hear a lot of their stories about the different projects they've worked on and how they go overseas to help deal with these conflicts.
Yeah.
I know my one professor now helped with the Georgia and South Ossetian conflict, which was really, really big. So probably those people as like the more exemplary, but I do know a lot of people who do everyday things to help.
So you could do both, right? It's possible to have the sort of, you know, the Jefferson Awards. We would not replicate that, but we would have a place for the Jefferson Awards or the Points of Light, which does honor the sort of big picture folks. But then you could also tell stories about the everyday thing. Maybe it's a scout leader. Maybe it's a teacher who was your mentor. Maybe it's your soccer coach. Imagine, Alexis, the idea one of our staff member had, and I think this is so beautiful. What if you could submit a one-page summary of that person's life and service, and you could do it online, but we also coordinated with the Library of Congress and the National Archives, and we actually collated and make a book out of it. And it would very quickly become the biggest book in the history of the world. It would be a book of millions of pages long, and it would be the book of American service, and it would be the biggest book in the history of the world. And you could be in it, or you could, your person you nominate could be on the digital version of that. So somebody could say to their, let's say you were one of the first Peace Corps volunteers. Now it'd be, you could say to your grandparent or your grandkids, did you know that your grandmother is in the National Museum and Center for Service? Grandkids would say, what, you're in a museum? Yep, let's go to the website and I'll show you. And there on the website, you have a profile of this person, complete with picture of themselves in Sri Lanka or wherever they were stationed in the Peace Corps, and they could tell that person's story. So it's all of the above, Alexis. And the idea is, of course, how nice to hear all those good stories to remind us that people are actually doing some pretty good things. So thanks for the questions and the ideas. Sandy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, sorry, it took a second to get on there.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. This is really exciting. I actually work at AmeriCorps. I think I missed you when you were here in town with Bill Basil, but
all right.
I heard from him, and I've been with the agency for about 26 years, and
wow.
You know, we're always trying to raise awareness and visibility. A lot of people don't know about AmeriCorps. It's not well known, but as you pointed out, you know, there's already over 1.2 million alumni, and the work that goes on every day is very inspiring. And I love the focus of this. That's not on the great man or great woman, but what everyday people can do, and the opportunities to serve. And we're coming on our 30th anniversary next year, and you know, we're always again trying to find ways to highlight the opportunities that there are out there to serve, and also the impact, which is really pretty profound on many issues. Most recently, COVID, helping millions of people with vaccinations, disaster relief, ongoing education, dealing with learning loss, food insecurity, and then of course the great connections you pointed out, people who sort of jump from one kind of service to another, from AmeriCorps to Peace Corps, from AmeriCorps into federal service, from you know, from the military into AmeriCorps. There's a whole, not enough, but a very large number of Americans who engage in those intensive forms of service, and then of course the service that most Americans do, as you said, sometime in their lives, and helping neighbors and just being part of, and it is part of our DNA as a country. And so I just wanted to learn a little bit more about the museum, and wish you the best of luck, and wanted to offer however we can be helpful. And I'll try to follow up with Bill about that.
That's great, Sandy. Thanks for your work with AmeriCorps. You know, I had literally 2 hours ago, I had an example of what you were just talking about. I was in the office of a United States Senator, and I was talking with two delightful, relative to me, young staffers. They were in their early 20s. And these people have worked together for, I think, a better part of a year at least. And at the end of it, the person said, well, the young man said, well, as a former AmeriCorps volunteer, I want to really thank you for this. And his colleague said, I didn't know you were in AmeriCorps.
Yeah.
You know, we said to Michael, as I mentioned, 1 million stories to tell and no place to tell them. And it really is true. And not that, you know, my wife years ago, my wife is a Ph.D. economist, has traveled the world doing global health. And young women students would admire her and see her as a role model. And my wife's so modest. She's very humble. She's quite accomplished and just super brilliant. But, you know, she's an aw shucks Indiana girl. And so these young people would come to her and say, gosh, I want to be like you. You're my role model at, you know, at talks she would give. And she kind of aw shucks said, oh, no, I've been lucky. Yep, you know. And I said to her once, you know, sweetheart, it is part of what makes you so wonderful that you are so modest. But these young women need to have heroes to look up to. You don't have to boast, but you can let them admire you. You can let them aspire to be like you in their own unique way. And so it's not that most of the people doing service do it so they can be recognized, but we need to recognize them because they've deserved it. And also, how else do we inspire the next generation? We have the best story in America. It's really pretty crazy. I don't know of a more important story in our entire country than the story of our ethic of service. And to tie this back into this peacemaking of the theme, you know, I mentioned, you know, peace. Khalil Gibran's work is love made visible. Peace is service made visible. If we serve and we show that people can be taking care of one another and helping one another, the need and motive to warfare is going to decline. And then when there is warfare, we're there to help them as peacemakers to help rescue the victims, as we're trying to do even as we speak today. So, Sandy, thank you for your leadership and work in AmeriCorps. And we just think there's such a natural partnership with this. You could imagine a whole wing of this museum dedicated to Peace Corps. Think of what CCC did for this country, for goodness sakes. You know, travel all around the country, and there are these marvelous lodges and national park sites and roads and pathways that the CCC built. And it not only helped others, it helped those CCC members have dignity and pride and a roof over their head and feed their families. This is a two-way street. So we want to tell those stories. So thank you.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to working with you. And I'll say hi to Bill. Jim, I almost became British for a second.
It comes and goes. I'm actually very impressed with what you're doing. I think it's very timely, and I get it. Sign me up.
Super, Jim.
Something that occurs to me now. My background is in civil affairs and operations and peacekeeping operations, refugee operations with the United Nations and International Organization for Migration and NGOs and such. So that's my professional experience for the most part. And then while I was overseas in the interim periods, I picked up a master's and Ph.D. at the Carter School, known under a different name in earlier times. And so I aged out in terms of being able to continue working overseas in my usual trade. At least my employers seem to think so. But it occurs to me, well, I just published a book in November, Analytic Reflections from Conflict Zones, a cautionary tale for a polarizing American world.
Wow.
And trying to convey through part memoir, part framework, conceptual work, and part commentary on what I see going on in this country that reminds me of patterns I've seen in conflict zones that lead to no good.
Very frightening trends.
Yeah. So your presentation makes me think that in some fashion, your service, the museum service, can help communicate a more nuanced understanding to the American public and other people about what's going on in terms of peace and conflict, understanding peace and conflict fundamentals, and help contribute towards perhaps settling down somewhat the dysfunctional, broken discourse in this country.
Yep.
And that's an area I can help with, and that I would like to hear more about how that might happen. So I don't have money, but I could offer some insights, and actually in the book I give quite a few descriptions of the kind of people that I've worked with in this trade, peace building trade, and on the operational side, the military side, and the conflict party representatives themselves, and just citizens, local citizens in these conflict zones, and their thoughts on what they're experiencing, and my thoughts on models and frameworks on how to better understand the circumstances of a conflict someone is in.
Yeah.
And to convey some of that in a more thoughtful, nuanced way, I think would be helpful.
Oh, I think so, Jim.
Yeah. And my next project, well, let me put it this way. I neither confirm nor deny that my next project is a screenplay.
Write us into it. We'll
so,
premiere it.
Yeah. So I'll be talking with a lot of people, drawing on their experiences in addition to the ones I've noted in my book, about what they see happening, what they believe might be helpful in their circumstances, what works, what doesn't work, and people serving in those roles. And
well, Jim, let me respond to some of the things you've said.
Yeah.
First of all, I think many of us share your concern, and with legitimacy, about the divisiveness of the United States. We actually see this as time sensitive right now. Part of the reason we want to expedite this is I don't want to wait 15 years. I actually see this as a save the country model. I really believe if we can talk, we have to give, especially young people, I'm thinking, Alexis, of you here, forgive me, but you're younger than me. And we've got to give young people a feeling they can do something. And Alex as well, and others. It can't just be climate change, war, nuclear holocaust, racial animus, social injustice, school killings, etc. But kids are swamped with that, and they just don't have a sense they can do something about it. When you do service, and at the end of the day, there's good research on this. You are mentally healthier. I'm a neuropsychologist by training, but I was talking to a gentleman a while back who's concerned about adolescent mental health. And I said, yes, they need more counselors. But there are plenty of days where I feel like if instead of seeing me as a counselor, they would go do something good to help someone else, it might be a whole lot more therapeutic than the hour I could provide. So we've got to, the other thing, Jim, is if somebody on this call can tell me anything that will unite people and transcend divisions better than service, I honestly don't know what it is. We had a flood in my district, a big flood on an election day. And instead of going and rallying votes, I used to be a whitewater kayaker. So I have all this rescue gear, right? Throw bags and technical rescue vests and all this stuff. So I went out with the fire guys out in these jet boats going through floodwaters up to people's house. Well, I didn't say, okay, I'm here to rescue you, but before I do, since it is election day, would you mind telling me how you plan to vote? I didn't do that. I wanted them to get in the boat, not to get their vote. And the point is, when you're doing service with somebody, and Rotary embodies this, right? Rotary, oftentimes in Rotary clubs, everybody knows who the local Democrat is and who the local Republican is and who's the independent and who's the other irascible cuss who can't get along with anybody. But There they are, and they're all going to go help repair toys at Christmas or go repaint the food bank. So on a micro level, Jim, back to your own profession, that same principles apply on the macro level. And how do we find service? The other quick thing, and then I'll get right to you, Julianne, because I see your hand up. We see part of this as engaging people in problem solving, and this will speak right to you, I'm sure. We should have people come to the museum, and one of the things they might do is say, here's your problem for today. We have a vaccine that needs to be refrigerated, but we need to get it to people who live 300 miles across the desert. There are no available roads, and by the way, there's a civil war. How are you going to do that? Or a nation's capital has had a major earthquake and a tsunami has hit it. There's now 2.5 million people without fresh drinking water or food or medical supplies. How do you help 2.5 million? You see what I mean? And you've lived this. Those logistical challenges, and then say, what skills can you bring to this? Each of us has some skill or some experience or knowledge that you can bring to this and engage people in that real world problem solving. And you have lived that, I'm sure, and I'll look forward to trying to read the book at some point. Julianne, I want to get to your question or comment.
I put my hand down. I think you have a good point about giving people something to think about, problems to solve. I might suggest you start with an empty plot of land that's covered in dirt, that's covered with trash, because when I hear what, the kind of examples you give, especially as a child, I would be totally overwhelmed by that. But I could imagine clearing out trash from a creek or tires from a plot of land and planting flowers or something like that. But, so many of the school districts require community service.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering what your thoughts about that are, because I know that, like for one of my children, they loved it and it was fine. And it was a wonderful bat mitzvah thing that they had to do, a project and all of that. For the other child, it was torture. It was torture. It was forcing them to do something they didn't want to do. And I think it turned them against it. I think it backfired. It backfired. And hopefully as they mature into older adults, they will think about going back and doing more volunteering. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that, on the required service hours.
Yep, great question. I haven't ever approached this question. I love the question. I have twin 17-year-old boys, and obviously I've dedicated much of my life to service. That switch is not yet thrown for them, I have to say. I love them dearly, but they haven't on any macro level said, I want to serve. I'm going to share 3 theories of personality that were dominant when I was in graduate school, just as an illustration. So one was the Skinnerian behavioralism, that you get a food pellet, you do the activity again, you get a shock, you don't, right? So that's the sort of behavioral approach. But then there was a guy named Maslow, or Maslow, who talked about intrinsic motivation and the desire to sort of have a hierarchy of needs, and including self-actualization. And then there was a guy named Bandura who talked about observing. Well, I think we can talk about all 3 in some ways. For example, back to the example you said about some kids say, oh, that's overwhelming. I met a delightful young girl. She was 7 or 8. And she read that Afghan refugees had to flee with nothing. They had absolutely nothing because they would die if they stayed 5 minutes more to grab their favorite thing. They would get killed or their family would get killed. So they came here with nothing. But she read that for the Afghan women, they're getting clothes and things, but one of the things they really needed was teapots, because tea and sharing tea is an essential part of their culture. So this little 7-year-old girl asked her mom, what could I do to do this? And her mom helped her, and she drew this great little story about how to prepare Afghan tea. And then she learned how to set up a GoFundMe page. And if you contribute to her GoFundMe page, the money goes to her to directly to helping people, Afghan women, have teapots. It's a tiny thing, but she figured out how to do it at age 7. And you know what? There are so many examples of that. And part of the thing is, if we say to everyone, you must all clear trash because we can't be more creative than that, which it can be really helpful. But some kids are like, I'm just not into picking up trash, Dad, right? But what if we said, what are you good at and interested in, and how could you apply that to help? So yes, the trash thing is a good example. I didn't mean to minimize that because it's manageable. But I think we also need to have a way to ask kids, what can you do that, what are you interested in? What are you good at? What do you have to give? You know, what can you give to make a difference? Not everybody will click with it, but I think there can be some to ways to do it. And if maybe somebody's an athlete and they'll say, well, you know, I could teach a kid to play soccer. All right, deal. Teach them to play soccer. Maybe they like to cook. But let's not just give people cookies. Let's help young kids learn to cook. You see the point. So so let's find ways. And I think the other point is that I love what you said. There needs to be a space in the museum itself for service, where you actually come and do service that day. So there will be ongoing. Maybe you're putting together water filter parts, right? Maybe you're, you know, stitching together something for kids. But we'll have ongoing hands-on service. And part of the center will be to learn best practices. How do we convey this? How do we not just have it be a symbolic act, but something that instills character? And I'm a big believer in character. How do we talk about what it is that helps people dedicate themselves and what kind of people do that? Because that example is hugely powerful. You know, we often ask people when we're doing this, why do you engage in service? And almost always it's, well, my parents set a role model example, or somebody else did this, or I saw this, or importantly, like Michael Smith, who heads up AmeriCorps now, I benefited from service. So I know personally, viscerally, how powerful it is. And therefore I want to give something back. So we'll find those combinations that work. And it may not be to have to visit the museum personally. Maybe it's virtual, and we'll have a meta museum that they can go to, because a lot of kids are more likely to go there, and I'm all right with that, if they learn something. Well, we're over an hour. We could spend a little more time because we were allotted an hour and a half, but we don't have to. Are there any final comments, thoughts, concerns? And this is hopefully the beginning of a productive relationship and discussion. Jim, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add one further thought.
We'll get you out, Alexis, in a sec. Go ahead, Jim.
I was embedded with the U.S. Army in Afghanistan as a civilian with USAID. And one of the soldiers asked me once, actually, we were in a armored vehicle getting ready to go out on a mission. They provided protection, and I was catching a ride to talk with some elders in a small town. And this woman, a soldier, asked me, is what we're doing here, is it working? Is it doing any good? And my response, I was recalling similar, well, occasions in Somalia and other places I'd worked in the past, where it became clear to me that the peace part, the peace building part, the humanity building part of these interventions, the ideas occur one person at a time, you know, one by one, individual at a time. And those, I recall particular individuals in different missionaries, different countries. And being exposed to a broader perspective, to an alternative view, and demonstrations of how to, you know, examples as a role model, so to speak, conveying different ways of doing things and looking at things.
Yeah.
It really sunk in that peace is built one individual at a time,
Yep.
generally speaking. So that, I just wanted to.
Oh, thank you for sharing
drop
that,
in.
Jim. It's so powerful because you get that question a lot. And I had the experience this summer of talking to a former Peace Corps volunteer who, after 25 years, went back to the little village. Where was it? Somewhere in Latin America. 25 years, maybe Guatemala. 25 years later, went back. and was welcomed with open arms. They remembered her. They were still doing things that sort of hygiene, sanitation kind of things that she had taught them. And of course, she herself, the other side of that picture, she herself was transformed by the experience. It was not just her helping them, that providing service transformed her. And I think you're right. And I think we have to ask, you know, it doesn't always work, but it often works in powerful, powerful ways. And I'll give you one other example. The former head of Mercy, of World Vision, Rich Stearns, shared this story, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I won't get it quite right. But Rich Stearns met with a fellow who told him the following story. At the end of the Korean War, he was a child, this little boy was a child, and he was destitute. He'd lost his family. I don't remember if they'd been killed or he was separated, but at any rate, he was alone, basically, effectively an orphan at the moment. He didn't have food. He didn't have any warm clothes. He didn't have shelter. He certainly wasn't going to school. And he was taken in by relief organizations. The UN, World Vision, part of how they got their start was in the Korean War. And this little boy was telling the story of how he was taken in by these people there to help. That little boy's name was Ban Ki-moon. He went on to become the Secretary General of the United Nations. And on our website, you'll see a story with a picture of the Vietnamese boat people. And there's this little tiny guy. He's like 3 or 4 in this picture. He's gone up to become a very, very successful doctor. And he gives back in every way. And his little life story is there. So those are the little one person at a time, Jim. And maybe kids can understand this if we think of it as Legos, right? You start building a Lego. How do you build a big Lego sculpture? One piece at a time. So
eventually,
go ahead, Jim.
Eventually, to use a phrase coined somewhere sometime, the seeds of peace are planted in the individuals, and you never know where they go. And I know a number of people in a number of places that are very active and influential now because of that little bit of prodding and example setting and that personal exposure.
Linda, I see your chat too. And Jim, by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't thank everybody on this call for your service, because my hunch is that each and every one of you has served in some capacity in your community and beyond. And so thank you for that. And Jim, I'm thinking of you particularly, given your example. Linda, I'll get to the national service here in just 1 sec. I want to respond to Alexis first. Alexis.
I like the idea you brought up about including some sort of service aspect with the museum. A lot of the stuff you mentioned was physical acts, but I was wondering if there was any idea of including donation, either a drop off at the museum itself or partnering with a center nearby.
Great concept. In 2 ways, we certainly envisioned that. One of our people put it really nicely. You know how when you leave these, almost every museum, when you leave it, it's designed, you have to go through the museum store. In fact, some years ago, there was a New Yorker cartoon that was pretty cute. It was a museum that was like this much of the cartoon and the rest of it was museum store. Well, our museum store will be a little different. They'll have swag, of course, but we hope that the museum store will be a place, if you were touched, and even the exhibits of the museum, if you were touched by something, let's suppose you really care about children's dentistry, something that gets overlooked a lot, but you learn about the needs kids have for dentistry in the developing world. And you're really interested in that. We will throughout the museum have ways for you to get engaged. And people will say, doesn't resonate with me, but this really does. And if we don't touch you in some way when you visit, then we haven't met our goal. So I love that idea, Alexis, that you could donate economically and make some commitments, and we will help connect with that. And we'll partner with the organizations and do some kind of screening to make sure it's credible groups, et cetera. But there's so many good causes out there. So in fact, we just, as a tiny aside, I shouldn't do this, but we just literally last week signed up for Amazon Smile. I don't know if any of you use Amazon Smile when you buy Amazon. I've always in the past given to Doctors Without Borders, but you can now give to the National Museum and Center for Service, if you're interested. Linda, you asked a question of how it's connected to the service year. We see it as very complementary. As you know, there's an effort to have almost every American, or everyone who can or is inclined, from somewhere between 17 to 24 to commit a year of their life to service in some fashion. And we're very, very supportive of that. However, we think there should be complementary, because if you have museums of service and you instill this value at an early age, when kids get to be 17 or 18 or 19 or 20, they'll want to do service because they'll have a taste of it. That's why the military markets to younger, mostly boys, frankly, but also to young women now. They want to instill that sort of ethos early on. But we also believe that as important as the service year, which it would be mostly a government-run program in collaboration with the private sector and the NGO sector, the one concern we have about that focus from 17 to 24 is it neglects everybody else. It doesn't do justice alone in and of itself. It doesn't do an injustice, but it doesn't encompass Rotary or Lions Club or all the senior programs, Service Corps, retired executives. So we think it's great, but it should be accompanied by the Museum of Service at every level. So you can tell the stories of the people who did the service year. You can connect them to the other service forms, and you can tell stories beyond that, because it shouldn't just be a focus on a government program when frankly, historically, and again, de Tocqueville talked about this. De Tocqueville said, look, back in 1823, he visited America and a famous book, Democracy in America. And one of the things he said was so interesting. Whenever there's an American who needs something, other Americans come to help them out. Because at the time, he said, there is not a big wealth difference between Americans. And so anybody who's getting help knows that they need to help the others in return because they could need the help one day, which was really interesting. I think our society's shifted from that. But his point was, central to the American DNA was a willingness to associate together and work together for the greater good. So yes, service year should be part of it. We should tell the story of why service matters before people are of age. We should tell the story of what people do while they're serving, but we should connect it way beyond that and honor lots of other forms of service. Well, this has been such a treat. Julianne, thank you for your kind words. I wish everybody a wonderful day. Thank you all for taking time to be with us. I thank the Carter School. I want to close with this. One of the things that is so remarkable about President Carter, and I had the opportunity to meet him, is not only did he serve before he was the president, he of course was the governor of Georgia and was involved locally through his faith and other things. He served as president, and then in a quintessential American way, went on to serve, as we all know, through his work with Roslyn and Habitat, and they have really embodied an ethos of service over self throughout their time. He's a gentle, kind individual, took time to talk to me some years ago, and I have immense respect for him. And the Carter School and the work you do at Mercedes, you have been serving so incredibly well. The Mercedes has helped set up all of these presentations. You must be working 24/7, Mercedes. I don't know how you do it, but we're grateful for it. And grateful that you allowed me to be participating in this. And I want to thank you for your work. And to Rich Rubenstein, who Jim mentioned, and the whole rest of the folks at the Carter School and George Mason, happy anniversary, your 50th year celebration. And thanks for your work. And to all the students, best of luck in your careers and in your studies.